Hi everyone, and welcome on to today's call. By my watch, it's just about time for us to get started. I can see we have lots of people on the call, so I think I'll go ahead and, without further ado, get straight into things. My name's Tony Restell. I'm the founder of socialhire.com, and really looking forward to presenting to you today on the topic of how you can make better use of social media. If you're in the midst of a job search, how you can put social media to work to help with that. If you want to be found by recruiters for your ideal next career moves, what you need to do to ensure that happens. And also more generally, how you can make use of social media to help propel your career forwards. So those are the things we're going to be addressing today, and I imagine we're going to be on the call for something like 45 or 50 minutes. And what I'm going to be looking to address with you is several things. Firstly, it's really key that you understand how companies have changed the way that they go about hiring their next employees now. This has absolutely fundamentally changed over the course of the last years, and if you haven't changed jobs within the last 18 or 24 months, you probably have very little understanding of just how much the jobs market's changed. And as I'm going around business schools and career services around the world presenting on these topics, it's a real eye-opener to executives and graduates just how much the jobs market has changed. So going to give you some really good insights there on what's been happening. Linked to that is the fact that a lot of employer hiring now involves employers looking for their ideal hires directly online and then approaching candidates directly, often without ever having advertised openings at all. And so an important spin-off of that is that you have to make some changes to your social media presence and to your online profiles in order that you actually start being found by recruiters when they're conducting those searches. So we're going to spend a bit of time on that topic as well. And then related to that is what I think is going to be a very dramatic rise in employee referral schemes over the course of the next couple of years. We've already seen these take off pretty significantly over the course of the last year, and I very much expect that trend to continue. Again, something that people are not always that aware is happening, but you really need to know what you need to be addressing on your side not to miss out on those opportunities. Then we'll wrap things up with a session on how you can get on the radar of recruiters and also more broadly of decision makers, so that if you want to use social media more proactively in your career, you have some ideas of how to go about doing that. And then at the end of the session, very welcome to fire through questions to me, and in the days after this call, I'll do my best to try and get back to you with further ideas and insights if there's anything else you need help with. So just by way of very brief background, I know lots of you on the call know me already, or we've met at careers fairs or industry events, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm a graduate of Cambridge University. Spent my early years in strategy consulting, and then moved into, became an entrepreneur in 2000. So I set up a niche job board for the management consultancy sector, and then sold that to JobSite and the Daily Mail several years after to setting that up in a multi-million sale. Stayed on with the business for a number of years, became a key executive at JobSite, and then I left and launched Social Hire in 2012. And what we do as a business primarily is help recruiters make use of social media and social networking sites to make effective hires. And so we have lots and lots of insights about how big corporates, how SMEs, how startups are leveraging social platforms to make their hires, and therefore how hiring patterns have actually changed over the course of the last years. And linked to that, I'm very often invited to speak as a guest speaker at business schools and at universities right across Europe to help prepare their MBAs and people who are soon to be graduating understand what's changed about the hiring market and therefore what they need to be doing differently to be successful in their careers and successful in their next career move. And it's really those kinds of insights that I would like to share with you here today. So first of all, let's try and get you prepared for today's hiring market, and in particular give you some good insights about just how companies' hiring practices have evolved over the last years. And just one thing that I would want to kick off with, I'm going to look through sort of a flow through how things have evolved over the last 20 years or so, because that will really illustrate to you how much things have changed just recently. But a couple of things here to flag right at the outset that I think have fundamentally changed in the jobs market over the last few years. Now, if I go back to the time before the Lehman crash, so when we had a very buoyant hiring market, much as we have had in recent times, at that time we saw that companies were very willing to accept compromises in their hiring profiles. So if a company was looking for a certain type of individual to join their business, they had, let's say, 10 must-have criteria that they wanted candidates to be able to demonstrate. Actually, in reality, because a lot of those roles were advertised, they became willing to accept significant shortfalls. And so if there was a list of 10 things that the company was looking for, actually, if someone could demonstrate they had 6 or 7 of those, that probably made them one of the front runners for the position. And so that was the hiring dynamics before the Lehman crash. Then we obviously had the crash. We had a severe recession in lots of parts of the world. And companies really changed their hiring profile dramatically. They became much more demanding. They wouldn't accept compromises. So if they wanted 10 things from their ideal candidate, it was hard to get them to budge from hiring candidates, any candidates who didn't have those 10 things. Maybe they'd accept a compromise on one of those things, but certainly no more. And that became very much the hiring trend throughout the downturn. What's really interesting now that companies are able to find and approach their ideal hires directly, rather than relying on advertised application response, companies have maintained that fussiness. And so today, even though the hiring market has dramatically improved, and in many parts of the world we have in recent months a hiring situation much more similar to the pre-Lehman boom years, we haven't had a change in employers' fussiness and demands over the candidates that they are willing to hire. So that 95% candidate fit, being really reluctant to accept any compromise in who they're looking for, has become something of a norm in the jobs market today. And so that's a really important thing for you to take on board. If you've been in the jobs market for a number of years, you've maybe changed jobs a couple of times previously, today you're probably going to find employers much more reluctant to accept someone who isn't a really good fit for what they're looking for than perhaps you would have done the last times you were changing jobs. So a really important and fundamental shift there, I think, in the labour market. And then linked to that, the economics of hiring have fundamentally changed. The arrival of databases like LinkedIn, the arrival of mass profiles of people on various social media sites has basically opened up to any recruiter that wants to have it the kind of mass Rolodex of candidates and candidate database that previously would have been the reserve of only the very best headhunting and recruiting firms. So that has also been a massive shift in the market over the last years, and I think has fundamentally changed the way that the hiring market operates. So a couple of things there for you to take on board. Now, let's backtrack to how things looked in the 1990s. So when I was coming out of Cambridge, when I was looking to secure my my first roles, this was really the way that things looked in those days. And what I've done for you here is plotted on the vertical axis how much it costs a company to make each additional hire that they're looking to make. And then on the horizontal axis, we can see how much of the market a company is able to reach via that particular channel. Now, what you can see is in the 1990s, there really were only two channels that delivered a significant volume of hires. And the size of the bubbles here is representative of how many hires would come through each of those channels. And the two channels were both high cost per hire channels. So newspaper advertising, we can think, in the UK of publications like the Sunday Times, would have had massive appointment sections with hundreds of vacancies being listed, all of which companies would have paid a very significant, usually £10,000 plus kind of price point to advertise their openings. Alongside that then, recruitment agencies who would charge a percentage of starting salary as their fee each time a candidate was hired. That would have been the other main channel for finding openings and being hired. The only other things, back in that era, referrals, so going to your existing employees and asking them to refer people who might be a good hire. That was a very small part of the total market, didn't reach anything like a significant number of the candidates that a company would want to reach. Careers fairs had their place, but they were very much niche events reaching certain particular audiences, perhaps a certain campus being reached with a careers fair or a particular geography, but certainly not something companies could rely on for significant portions of their hires. And then at the top right area of the chart, we see headhunters. And I'll draw the distinction here for those of you who aren't familiar with recruitment agencies versus headhunters. A headhunting business would really be taken on by a company with a brief to find, let's say, find and approach one of the top 30 finance directors in the country who are focused on a particular industry, let's say the telecoms industry. And a headhunting firm would go out and research who are those top 30 people and then approach those candidates irrespective of whether they're actually looking for a job at the moment or not. And that is a very costly way of doing things, or certainly historically was, and would really only have been used for the really senior positions in a company. Compare and contrast that with recruitment agencies who would typically be charging a fee only if they were successful in hiring someone, and who would very often be dealing with advertised responses. So having a job listing, advertising that in a newspaper, or sending out a communication to their database of candidates, seeing who applied to the role, and then screening through and picking out the best of those applications. So quite a distinction there between the roles of those two types of recruitment businesses. That was the situation in the 1990s. If we fast forward now 10 years, so we're moving now into the period where I'd set up my job board and lots of other job boards, the likes of Monster and so on, really became very important businesses. You can see a huge change here. And the huge change is that job boards gave direct employers a means of hiring candidates at a very low cost per hire and allowing them to reach a very significant portion of the candidate market for that low cost per hire. And so if you were changing jobs before the advent of things like LinkedIn, sometime 10, 15 years ago, right through until probably just a few years back, you would have seen job boards increasingly important. During this era, if you spent enough time online researching openings in your particular sector, you would have been able to find most of the opportunities that companies were looking to fill. You would have been able to find that through internet research. And so this was a period when the jobs market was very open. Most people could find most of the openings that they would want to apply for. There were obviously some major changes that happened here. Newspaper advertising really dropped off as a result of this low-cost competitor that could reach the same kind of market but for a fraction of the cost. Recruitment agencies also suffered a little bit. Direct employers would tend to put their vacancies onto job boards and then only turn to the recruitment agencies with those they were perhaps struggling with or needed particularly quick turnaround with. And then at the bottom left, you can see the companies' own websites, so the careers pages of companies. They emerged, but actually they were never really that important a source of hires in terms of volumes. And employee referrals, as email technology became more and more advanced, as more and more sites sprung up that allowed you to keep in touch with your past friends, then there was more and more scope for employees to refer people who might be good hires for the business. But still during this period, not a particularly important source of hires in terms of volume. So that's the situation in the 2000s. If we now again fast forward another 10 years, you can see another absolutely massive change that's taken place. And that change is the advent of social media and social networking sites. Really interesting changes here. So the job boards market has certainly been impacted by the arrival of the likes of LinkedIn and Facebook and so on. It's given companies an alternative means of going and making hires. Newspaper industry been hit even further still. And referrals, we're going to talk about this in its own right a little bit later in the presentation. Currently they are in the bottom left quadrant, but that is really because we have a situation at the moment where some companies have tried employee referral technologies and are getting great results with them. Other companies have yet to really try them at all. And so on average across the employment market, they're not yet the massive source of hires that they could be. But I think if we were to fast forward and give this presentation again a year or two from now, you would see employee referrals there having moved significantly to the right, and companies having access to a lot of the market that they would want to hire from and at a low cost per hire. And so you can very much expect that particular channel to have accelerated. But what's really stands out from this chart is just how big an impact social media has had. Job boards had a massive impact when they first came on the scene and took major spend away from newspapers. And social media now has come in and has had just as profound an impact on the hiring market. So absolutely key. And we're going to talk about how companies are using social sites to make their hires, because there are some really important implications for you as a candidate trying to get hired today. So overall, the hiring market, has been massively impacted and changed by the arrival of social networking sites. And things that I would particularly draw attention to, firstly, there's been a dramatic shift and a dramatic reduction in the cost of having a candidate database, and in the availability, there's been a massive increase in the availability of that information through a combination of LinkedIn and people aggregators, which I'll talk about again in just a moment. Any company now, anyone who wants to set up a recruitment business, any recruitment agency, small companies, medium-sized companies, large corporates, anyone who wants to have access to a massive database of candidates in their sector now has that. And that was not the situation just a few years ago. So that's had a big impact. The speed and the reach of employee referral schemes has been massively changed, and we will look at that separately in just a moment. But for some companies, that's opened up a major new route for making hires into their business. And thirdly, but by no means least, there's been this significant switch now where companies can become publishers and have audiences in their own right. So go back 10 years and a company that wanted to reach lots of candidates in their sector historically would have had to have bought advertising or paid for email shots from a publication in their particular niche sector. Fast forward to today, and lots of companies have their own recruitment presence on social media, and they've built up a massive following of professionals and candidates in their particular industry and their niche. So when they want to advertise that they're holding a careers open day, when they want to invite potential candidates in for an assessment day or to meet the team or to apply for openings, they now have their own audience that they can market those things to. They don't necessarily have to go out and buy that exposure from third-party publications. So really important changes. Now, overall, what I would stress as the outcome of these changes is that the hidden jobs market has massively increased. So the portion of all jobs that are now being filled, and this is true right up through the executive ranks, the portion of all jobs that are being filled without them ever being openly advertised in a place where you could find the roles and apply to them directly has massively increased. The hidden jobs market has grown enormously over the last years. And to understand that, here's what happens. So if there is a new role within a company and the recruitment team have to find a hire for that particular opening, what's going to happen? Well, the first thing that's going to happen is the internal recruiters who already have paid to have a LinkedIn license, who've already paid to have licenses to people aggregators, people search engines. The first thing they're going to do is try and find their ideal hires on social sites and approach those candidates directly. And because they're finding and approaching people directly, they're hidden jobs because they're not being advertised. Simultaneously, if the company has invested in employee referral technology, then that technology will be kicked off and it will start looking for ideal hires for the company for that particular vacancy amongst the contacts of all that company's existing staff. And again, that is happening behind the scenes without the role being advertised. So they're both key. And then the third thing, companies may choose to alert their followers about the roles that they're looking to fill. So if it's a company that's built up a significant social media fan base and follower base, if they decide they are going to openly announce that they're trying to fill a particular position, rather than necessarily paying to advertise that on a job board or on somewhere like LinkedIn, they're most likely, first of all, to market that to their existing follower base because they've built up that asset and it costs them nothing to share those particular career opportunities with their fan base and followers. So you'll notice none of those things involve the company openly advertising the position in a way that you or I could actually find that position. And that is the huge change that's taken place over the course of the last few years. So if that's what's happened, and if those are the three approaches that companies are going to start out trying to make their hires with, it should be pretty obvious that you need to be making some fairly fundamental changes to the way you're going about looking for your next position and looking to be noticed by recruiters who are the gatekeepers to those positions. First thing you need to do, if recruiters are searching for their ideal hires on social sites, the first thing you need to do is make sure you've got profiles on all of those sites and that you've done a great job with those profiles. They need to be complete, and more important, they need to be keyword optimized. So it's no good you being a great candidate for a role that a particular employer is looking to fill if you aren't coming up when they search for their ideal candidates for that role. then you're never being taken into consideration as a candidate for that vacancy. So we've got to do some work there, and I'll talk about that a bit more in just a moment. The second thing we need to do, where employee referral programs are becoming more and more important, it is obviously more and more important for us to have contacts who work in as many companies as possible. If you take two candidates who are identical, who have the same profiles on social media, they're the same background, same education, they've worked at similar companies, they've got similar keywords on their profiles. If one of them has done a great job of staying in contact with all of their past business contacts, they've connected with them on social media, and the other person hasn't, well, when a company's employee referral technology starts looking for ideal hires amongst the existing employees' contacts, obviously the candidate who has built relationships and connections with people at as many companies as possible is going to be being considered for all sorts of openings that the other candidate isn't. So it's really key to expand your network at every opportunity. And I'm very often asked, who should I connect with on social media, and how aggressive should I be in staying in touch with people, in accepting connection requests, in tracking down people I used to work with or was at college with. And my answer is, for this reason, you should err on the side of being more generous with who you connect with, because you never know which of your past business contacts or people you were at college with, you never know which of them is going to start working at a company where you would like to be employed and where you want to be being considered by their employee referral programs. So that's absolutely key. And then the third thing you want to be doing, if companies are going to be marketing some of their opportunities, their career evenings, their open days, their assessment weekends, if they're going to be marketing those things on their recruitment team's social media profiles, clearly you need to be following the profiles of all the companies that you have any aspirations of one day joining, because otherwise you may never get to find out about career days, assessment days, opportunities to apply, to get internships, whatever it may be. You won't get to know about those if you're not following those companies' recruitment profiles. So all those things are absolutely key, and you'll have picked up that one of the fundamental things you need to do is rework your social media profiles. And this is one of the things that I'm very often asked about, so let's spend a little bit of time on this. Let's have a think about how a recruiter is going to search on social media for their ideal candidates. So a lot of big companies and increasingly lots of smaller companies will have LinkedIn licenses that entitle them to search the entire LinkedIn database, irrespective of whether those people are actually in the networks of that company and its employees. If you've bought the LinkedIn license, you can just search the entire user base of LinkedIn and approach those people directly. So that's something that we can expect the corporate recruiters are going to be doing. A second thing that you ought to be aware of as well is there are now lots of different people aggregators out there, and people aggregators are essentially search engines for finding people. And what those people aggregators do is pull in results from across dozens or hundreds of different social media and profile sites. So instead of just restricting your candidate search to LinkedIn, using a people aggregator allows you to search for candidates wherever they may have profiles. And so they are increasingly popular as well. You and I wouldn't have particularly used those or come across them because they do carry fairly chunky corporate license fees to have access to them. But believe you me, there are lots of different platforms like this that are extremely powerful and that companies, large and small, are taking out licenses to be able to use. So that obviously means there are lots of social sites, not just LinkedIn, where a recruiter could find your profile and choose to approach you direct. And so what a recruiter is going to do when they have an open position is search for the skills and the experience that are a match for the job description they've had through from the business. So in days gone by, a recruiter would have had a job description through from the business. The key hiring decision makers would have all had their input on what they want their ideal candidates to have. And in the old days, a recruiter would have turned that into a job advert and put it out there in a newspaper, on a job board, and then wait for some of the right candidates to apply for those openings. Today, instead of that, a recruiter is more likely to take those must-have skills and experience profile that the business is looking for and to go out and try and find people with those kinds of profiles on social sites and then approach them direct. And that's why they're not willing to accept compromise in terms of who they will hire, because they can now go out and identify exactly who they want to hire and approach those people directly and not have to accept nearly as much compromise as before. So what you need to do to be effective in this particular style of hiring environment is you need to put yourself in the shoes of recruiters and you need to reverse engineer what they're doing. So what I would suggest you do, there are still lots and lots of job adverts out there. So whilst not nearly as many roles are now being advertised as in days gone past, there are still plenty enough for you to do this kind of exercise. So you want to go and use whatever site you like to use to find jobs in the particular sector that you're interested in, and you want to go and try and find as many of your ideal roles as you can. Open lots of tabs, get as many of those job listings up in front of you as you can. If you can't find a dozen or more immediately, then keep a record of the ones you are finding and go back and repeat that process a couple of weeks later. What we want to do then in those job adverts is go down to the candidate requirements section or the must-have section or our desired candidate profile is, and we want to look at the bullet points that appear there where recruiters talk about the things they want their candidates to have if they're to be considered for interview. And that then becomes a checklist for you of things that you make sure you're incorporating into your social profiles. Because let's just keep it really simple. Let's say that a recruiter has been tasked with finding someone, and one of the things they have to have is be fluent in French. Well, if you don't have fluent French on your profiles, but you are fluent in French, then whenever a recruiter's searching for that profile of candidate, you aren't going to show up as a potential match. And what I'll say to you, when I do this kind of session at a business school, when I'm doing it face-to-face with a room of people, and they start doing this exercise, it's a real eye-opener for them. Because as they go down and they look at the bullet points of what recruiters are looking for, they realize that there are lots of things that they do have in terms of experience, in terms of skills, but that are currently missing from their LinkedIn profile, missing from their social profiles elsewhere on the web. And so that is the gap that we've got to close, so that whenever a recruiter is searching for a list of 10 things that they want from their ideal hire, and you do have those 10 things, you need to be coming up in their search results because you've included them all on your profiles. So that's absolutely key, and you can spend a lot of time running through that exercise, but essentially we're looking for all the things that appear in the must-have or desired candidate requirement section. They'll be talking about the skills they want. You might have to have experience of Salesforce. You might need to have experience of managing a team. You might need experience of using certain IT packages, of having worked in certain sectors. The list goes on and on and on. But that's what you want to make sure is that on your profile you have included as many of those things as you possibly can. And I may well look at running some LinkedIn profile sessions in the coming months as well to sort of tackle that particular aspect of things in even more detail. But what I would say is important is don't limit yourself to LinkedIn. So there are companies out there who don't have a LinkedIn corporate license, and they are searching elsewhere in places where they can find and approach candidates for free. So don't restrict yourself to just doing a good job on LinkedIn. Once you've incorporated all the skills, all the keywords that are important in your desired sector and for the desired roles you want to secure, you need to go and replicate that profile then on Google+. Google+ is extremely quick and easy to copy across a profile from LinkedIn. It really is, get yourself a nice cup of coffee, sit down, half an hour later, at max, you've got your Google+ perfected profile ready as well. And that does a number of things. It means you can be found by recruiters who aren't as reliant on LinkedIn. It also means that on a regular Google search, if someone's looking for you, perhaps they're doing a background check on you before inviting you in for interview, a Google+ profile is highly likely to appear high on Google's search results for a search for your name. So that gives you another search result on page 1 of Google that reflects you and represents you in the way that you would want to be seen by employers. So definitely do that. The second thing which really surprises people is you've got to start filling out your Facebook profile. And candidates say to me, yeah, Tony, but I don't want recruiters looking at my Facebook profile. I don't want them taking into consideration my Facebook posts as an indication of whether I'm a good hire or not. And I completely agree with you. And I'm not disagreeing with that sentiment at all. What you have to know, though, is recruiters advertising on Facebook can choose to run adverts that are targeted at certain demographics of people that they want to reach. So if a recruiter wants to target people who are currently studying for an MBA, or who have worked at certain companies, or who have an interest in certain things, maybe certain technologies, whatever it may be, there is an unbelievable amount of demographic data on Facebook that recruitment advertisers are able to target to get job adverts in front of the exact people that they want to hire. Maybe you have a local employer who's looking to hire lots of people in your neighborhood. Well, they can run that advert to only be seen by people who are within a certain number of miles of that location. But if you haven't included this information on your Facebook profile, then the chances of an employer's advert ever making it into your Facebook feed, and therefore you becoming aware of that opening, are diminished very significantly. So that's why it's important to replicate some of that key information onto your Facebook profile as well. And last but not least, if you are on Twitter, then add some professional keywords to your bio. Add a hashtag that's commonly used in your industry. Make it easy for recruiters to find you if they are using Twitter as a place to search for and approach candidates. Not difficult, literally only takes a few moments, but some of the key keywords you found when you were perfecting your LinkedIn profile, carry those across to Twitter so that you can be found there as well. So that is why it's so important to make changes to all of your social media presence in order that you're considered for all the roles that are now being filled through the hidden jobs market. And linked to that is a similar situation around employee referrals, because employee referral schemes now are increasingly important. Companies who have been investing in employee referral technology and making significant use of that are finding they're making 30% or even 40% of all of their hires through the employee referral route. And that includes, managerial and executive roles. So if you're not tuned into what you need to be doing to be being noticed by employee referral programs, then by definition, you're actually missing out on all the opportunities that are being filled that way. And let me just share with you a survey that was done asking recruiters which of their hiring channels were delivering the highest quality of candidates. And this should really shake you up, because you can see there, out winning by an absolute mile are employee referrals. Companies have always loved employee referrals. They find that candidates are likely to join more willingly, more quickly. They find that they're able to hire good candidates for a lower cost. They find that those people go on to stay in the company for longer. They're more likely to remain with the company because the company's more likely to live up to their expectations because they know someone in that company already. All sorts of reasons why companies have always loved employee referrals over any other source of hires. And as long as I've been in the recruitment industry, so since 2000, it's always been the case that companies have said to me they would like to make all their hires by employee referrals if they possibly could. The challenge has been that up until recently, the technology hasn't been there to make that possible for them. So that is companies' highest quality source of candidates. And then in second position are candidates coming through social media, so through the types of things we've just been talking about. And then traditional job boards, where I'm sure many of you on the call have been, focusing your efforts, are only in third place. And other things you might be doing, going to job fairs or whatever, are way down the list. So if you're not doing the things to perfect your social media profiles, to get the right keywords into them so that you're being found and you're being approached directly by companies, you are massively missing out. And employee referral programs, I think we can expect to grow and grow and grow. Because as the vendors of those technologies, as their sales forces go out in the market and start spreading the word about the amazing results that some companies are now getting with these technologies, it's only a matter of time before more and more companies jump on board and want to be using those as well. It's exactly what happened with LinkedIn. For a while, they were a niche source of hires, and it was only some, avant-garde companies who really adopted LinkedIn and started using it aggressively. But then once you had the sales force out there spreading the word about how amazing an impact this was having on recruitment, once that was out in the market, it was only a matter of time until it became a really mainstream way of finding and approaching candidates. And I'm absolutely convinced the same will be true of employee referral technologies. So how did employee referrals used to work, and why were they not, a good source of large quantities of hires? Well, just go back and think how this would have worked. So, historically, there's a new job in a company. It would be sent round to existing staff via email. Employees then had to try and think of, who do I know who might be a good hire, who might be a good fit for this position? Now, try to imagine yourself and try to think about how many people in your network you would know today who they're working for and what job they're doing if you didn't have access to LinkedIn and if you didn't have access to any other social media. I'll be perfectly frank and say, most of my old school friends, most of the people I went to university, business school with, people who I worked with in my early years of professional life, I wouldn't have any idea of where they are now and where they're currently working, what they're currently doing, if I didn't have regular insights into that through social networking sites. So back in those days when that didn't exist, it was massively hit and miss whether any staff in a company would actually even know some people who could be a potential fit for that opening. So obviously that dramatically reduces the number of hires that could ever be made through that channel. And then, even if staff could think of people who would be a good fit for that role, They then had to craft messages, come up with them, figure out wording of an email, make sure they had that person's email address. Not a very British thing to do to sort of proactively, aggressively approach people like that to be considered for employment. So historically, this produced high quality of hires, but in very small numbers. Now, if you fast forward to today, what's happened is that employee referral programs have been absolutely transformed by social sites. So imagine a big company. Think of a big employer you would like to join. And now imagine that within that company, 80 or 90% of all their staff have signed up to participate in their employee referral program. What those 80 or 90% of staff have done is they've connected up their social media to the employee referral platform. So whenever the company has a new vacancy they need to fill, the employee referral technology can go out and it can search, much like a Google algorithm, for people who look like a great fit for that opening amongst all of the staff's LinkedIn network, amongst all of their Facebook friends, etc., etc., etc. And all that will happen is that staff will get through an email saying, hey, we're looking to fill this particular position and we're willing to pay a referral reward, a couple of $1,000, if anyone that you know ends up being hired. And hey, look, we've found the following 3 people that look like a great fit for this opportunity. Just click these share buttons and those opportunities will be forwarded onto your contacts from you. That is extremely powerful. Imagine a candidate who's being approached for a role by a recruiter they've never had any contact with before, don't know, and have no reason to open that message. That produces a relatively low response rate. Now imagine that people are getting that same email through from someone they know. It's a blast from their past. It's someone they were at business school with, someone they met at a conference a couple of years ago, someone that was a partner of the last business that they worked with. You're much more likely as a candidate to open that email and you're much more likely to act upon it. And that is why companies are getting absolutely fantastic results when they're using employee referral programs that are powered by social media. The key things here, though, are twofold. Firstly, your profiles have to have the right keywords in them. So if there is a job listing and the employee referral technology is looking at that job listing and then trying to find candidates that look like a great match for that opening, guess what? If that job listing says that people must have certain key things and those key things aren't on your profile, then just like being found by recruiters on LinkedIn, you're not going to be found by employee referral technologies unless you've got the right keywords on your profiles. But linked to that, and this comes back to the issue of building your networks, you need to have contacts who work in as many different employers as possible, because you're only going to be considered as a potential employee referral hire if you've got a contact in that company already. So take 2 candidates who've done a great job of staying in touch and being connected with all of their past business contacts, and then another who's done a really poor job of that, and you can now see why one of them is going to be being considered for and approached with lots of opportunities over the next years, and the other one isn't. And it simply comes down to how proactive they've been about staying in contact with those people on social media. So hopefully that's helpful as well. So we've seen the change in the hiring market. We've seen how companies are now finding and approaching candidates direct with recruitment teams through the likes of LinkedIn and people aggregators. And then we've moved on to see how actually technologies now are really boosting the results that can be got through employee referral programs, and why you building your networks is therefore a really key element of progressing your career in the coming years, so that you're being considered for as many of those fantastic opportunities that are out there as you'd want to be. But what else can you do if you're wanting to more proactively get on the radar of recruiters, or if you're wanting to build a profile and a presence that's noticed by decision makers? What are some of the things that you can do, and what should you be doing differently? When I'm doing presentations like this face to face, if I've got a large audience there of business school students or executives or whoever it may be, I love at this point to do a quick show of hands, and I'll ask things like how many of the audience have 1,000 or more connections on LinkedIn, how many are actively engaging on Twitter each day, who's gone out and built an active network on Google+, who has updates scheduled to go out to their networks while they're actually in that presentation there that day, or for you while you're tuned in and watching today. And it's really interesting because you will find that the majority of people can't tick those boxes. So the majority have not been nearly as proactive in connecting with people on LinkedIn as they could have been. And let's just put that 1,000 figure into context for just a moment. If you've been in professional life for 5 or 10 years, then 1,000 connections is hardly anything. Think every week of all the people you've come into contact with in business, where you've actually had enough interaction with them that it would be appropriate for you to want to stay in contact with them as a business contact. You should be picking up dozens and dozens of new connections every month that you've been in employment. So for someone who's 5 or 10 years into their career, or even more, you should have a really large number of connections on places like LinkedIn without having accepted any kind of spammy approaches whatsoever. So that's really noticeable. You'll find it's only the minority who have built up a proper network on Google Plus or on Twitter. But the people who are really building a strong professional executive presence for themselves, so that they are seen as an expert in their particular area, and they are approached with conference speaking engagements, with invitations to be interviewed, with approaches from headhunters for particular opportunities that companies need to be filled. It's the people doing those sorts of things that stand out from everyone else, and who are really putting social media to the best use in their career. So what are some things that you could do to get noticed? And I have to say, when I'm with a class or with a group presenting on this, this in itself would be a half day or a full day presentation. So I'm just going to touch on a few things that you could do to have a bigger impact straight away. There's obviously a lot more that you could do over and above what we're talking about here. The first thing I would encourage you to do is make more effective use of LinkedIn. Now, anyone who has a professional license on LinkedIn, be that a recruiter, be that head of sales, whoever it may be, they are highly likely to pay attention to the page that is who has viewed my profile. And so if you want to get on the radar of, for example, lots of recruiters in your industry, a very quick way of doing that is to go and look at their LinkedIn profiles. Only do that after you've added a really good headline to your own profile that's going to make them want to click through and read and find out about you when they see that you've been looking at their profile. But looking at the profiles of other people is a very good way of getting noticed. And then connecting in a smart way. So many people send through a LinkedIn connection request with just the standard text, and that is such a missed opportunity. You want to be sending through a paragraph that sparks a conversation, that tells them why you were interested in connecting with them, that gives them the opportunity or a reason to answer a question that you've put to them. Something that sparks conversation from the very moment that you connect with them. It's a really small amount of effort that's needed, but instead of just having lots of LinkedIn connections that you've never had much interaction with, if every single connection request is done with some kind of personalization and some kind of question that sparks conversations, you've then got a social network that is much more powerful. People where you have interacted with them and they feel like they know you much better. So that's certainly something to do. If you want to get on the radar of people, then mentioning or retweeting people is very effective for this. Whether that's on LinkedIn, on Google+, on Twitter, even potentially Facebook if you're in some of the business groups on Facebook. Mentioning other people in your updates results in them getting a notification that they have been mentioned in a post. And so that draws attention to you and to the post that you've mentioned them in, encourages people to take a look at your profile, encourages people to interact with you or connect with you. So something you can do really quickly that has a very dramatic effect. Similarly, commenting on other people's updates. It's one thing to like or plus one someone else's update on social networks. And if there's someone who gets a lot of those kinds of things over the course of a week, they might not particularly notice that you've done that. Whereas if you have taken the time to comment on their updates, to say something insightful or meaningful, or to ask a question, then that is going to be noticed by everyone that you do that to, and it's much more effective as a way of getting yourself on their radar. You can certainly favorite or like updates. That can result in them getting notifications as well. So there's no harm in doing that. And if you haven't been doing that already, then that's a very quick win for getting noticed. Use hashtags, particularly on Twitter. This is important, but also elsewhere. You have a certain number of people connected with you who are following you, who get your updates. But then there are lots more people in your industry who are monitoring certain keywords and hashtags to stay informed about what's happening in your industry. So by intelligently using the right hashtags, you can actually have your professional presence noticed by lots more people in your industry, draw attention to yourself, get lots more connection requests, and build your professional standing. And there are obviously various things that you can do that are more live events, whether that's participating in tweet chats, in live streaming video sessions like Hangouts on Air, participating in very active group discussions on some of the social sites. These are all things that you can do that will get yourself noticed and make yours a name that people in your industry know. So set yourself a little bit of time each week to do these kinds of things, and you will notice a very dramatic change in the interactions that you have on social media, and in interactions that actually start resulting in positive business outcomes for you and positive career developments for you. Now, what is key on social networks is to play the long game. And one of the biggest problems that I see, one of the biggest shortcomings that I see, is when people suddenly are in a position where they need other people's help. Maybe they've been made redundant. Maybe their company's being taken over and they no longer want to stay with that company. Maybe something's happened in their market and all of a sudden they're way short of their sales target for that quarter. If the first thing that people see you do on social sites is to ask for help, that is not usually going to produce very good results for you. So a candidate, connects with me. The very first thing they ask is, can you help? Can you have a look at my resume? Can you forward it on to the right people in your network? That's unlikely to produce results. And I know from recruiters around the world that's unlikely to produce results. Whereas if that same candidate connects with me, spends a little bit of time building up rapport with me, they've commented on some of my updates, they've maybe done something to help me, maybe they've shared a link to a webinar that I'm doing, or promoted an event I'm speaking at, something that's drawn attention to them having helped me. Then when they approach me a few weeks down the line and see if I'd be open to helping them, I'm much more likely to do so. But you have to, at the outset, focus on engaging with people, helping people that you want to have long-term relationships with, not promoting what it is that you want from your social media presence. The kinds of things you can do: help share other people's updates to a larger audience. Ask questions that ask other people to talk some more. There are lots of things that people would love to get visibility for on social media, but some of them, if you come out and say them yourself, it just looks overly promotional and therefore doesn't have the desired effect. Whereas if someone else asks you a question that allows you to say what you'd been wanting to say, that can come across completely differently. So, imagine you've got a company is going to be holding a careers event somewhere, and one of their recruiters has put out an update about that open event. You might very well ask, really excited about this event. In preparation for that, I know some people in my network would love to know, why is it that people typically join your company rather than your main competitors A, B, and C? That gives that recruiter the excuse to say why candidates typically will join their company rather than competitors A, B, and C, without coming across as salesy, because they're now responding to a question that someone in their network has asked them. So that's an example. Ask questions that allow other people to talk some more about things that they would really like to talk about. If you're trying to get on the radar of a business owner or a head of sales, something like that, ask them to talk some more about their product or what it is that differentiates them from their competition, or the major business wins that they've had recently. These allow them to get really good visibility for their business and to fulfill their goals in a way that they wouldn't if someone hadn't asked that question of them. So these are really good ways of building rapport, playing the long game, but winning people over to your side so that you can get help when you really need it. And if you're on social media for the purpose of accelerating a job search, the same would be true if you're after sales or anything else. Don't talk about your job search at all until you're confident that a good relationship has been formed, because you will get way more results if you build that relationship first and only ask for help thereafter. And sort of in a nutshell, I would say, think of social media like a bank account. You have to put lots of value into other people's lives before you can expect to get lots of value back from them. And the people on social media who really fail are the ones who want to get lots of value from other people without having first done anything else for them in turn. And certainly appearing desperate is one of the most common mistakes I see even very seasoned business people making on social media. Certainly when they need a new job, but actually just more generally, people come to social media for the first time, they decide to invest in it, and they lack the patience to build up relationships before they start spouting what it is that they want from the people they're connected with. So make sure you don't fall foul of that. So I hope that's been really helpful. We've obviously gone through in quite some depth how the hiring market has changed, how companies are now finding and approaching candidates directly, and therefore the rise of the hidden jobs market, and the ways that you need to change your approach to being noticed for career positions, and the types of steps that you need to be following. We've gone through the kinds of changes you'd need to make on LinkedIn, how you'd want to roll those profiles out to other sites so that you have broader visibility. And then with employee referral programs, we've seen how important it is for you to proactively grow your social connections. And if you've been someone who's fallen behind on that, you want to take advantage of those social sites tools to look through your contacts list, to go through your Outlook, and to find as many connections that have lapsed as possible for you to be able to reinvigorate those and send through connection requests on social sites. So we've seen all of those things in relation to finding a new job and progressing your career, being headhunted and approached with opportunities. And then we've wrapped things up there talking about some of the ways that you can go about getting noticed on social media, be that by recruiters or be that by a broader business audience that you would like to reach for professional reasons. I've given you some ideas of things you can do to be effective there. There's obviously a lot more we could cover over the course of half a day or more. But that should give all of you on the call a really good grounding. So I hope that's been really helpful. You've got the questions section over on the side of the screen. If you've had any questions during the course of this call, you're very welcome to put those to me. I'll leave that up for another 30 seconds or so that you can get those questions through, and they'll be emailed off for us to look at and respond to if we're able to. And in just a second, I'll forward on to a page. If you found this helpful, it would be a massive help to us if you would share this session on your social networks, recommend it to others as something that they would get real value from, because word of mouth recommendations for us, particularly on social sites, extremely important. So if you have got value from this, if you found it informative, would really appreciate you taking the time to do that as well. So thanks for your questions. I look forward to getting back to you on those over the coming days. And to all of you who do go on and share this for us, massive thanks from all the team here at Social Hire. Thanks. Bye for now.